Hey everybody, I am Melanie with HomePro, your home inspection company, and I am joined today by Rael Levin. And if you are a webinar participant, you are welcome to ask us questions in the chat or the Q&A. We will get to them at the end of today's class. So you are here for a little class that we started during the pandemic called Start Smart. I had ideas for it ahead of time, but we started being able to do virtual inspections when everybody was kind of afraid of being together. And so we started doing them as a class. We used to do them on site. So Rael used to come inspect my house and I would follow him around with my iPhone. And that was a little bit limiting because we were subject to internet issues, and also we could only do my house. So since then we've expanded. We have one of these on an older historic home. We have one of these on a 60s ranch. And today we're going the other direction and talking about new construction. So with that, I am going to get started. The class will be roughly an hour, and Rael will stay after to answer any questions about this particular inspection or just general inspection questions. If you have, you want to be able to ask a question without your client here, you're in the perfect spot. So, Rael, why don't you tell us a little bit about you and why you are smart enough to talk about inspections with us?
Well, I've been with HomePro about 14 years. Did about 4,000 inspections for the company over those years, and prior to that, I'd had 30 plus years of construction experience, flipping homes back before it was a big deal on TV. And so here we are now to share some of the knowledge and some of the experience that we've gained over the years, and hopefully we can certainly answer the questions for you.
4,000 houses, that is a ton. All right, so the way the class is going to go is we're going to follow the report, and I will show you videos of how we got the information from the report, and this will be a little bit as if you were at the inspection itself. And then we'll ask Rael for information about what do we typically see in a new construction, some of the things that he's seen in the past. The very first thing I want to do, though, is share with you how to read an inspection report. So we are going to go to my share screen. Oops. We're going to get there. It's a little bit tricky today because I'm sometimes sharing video and sometimes sharing still screen. So, so this is the inspection report for the house that we are looking at today. This is a Charleston home, and it's a new construction. And whether it's new construction or resale, one of the important things about looking at a report is that reports are broken down into the different systems and components. So we've got the roofing, the exterior, the structure, electrical, heating, cooling, all of those components and systems. And then within each of those, we have 3 sections. And one is the description. That's what do you own? These are all of the things that we inspected and are required to report on. And so the description section is the one that's paid very little attention to during the real estate transaction, yet afterwards it serves as a homeowner's manual. So in this case, you can see we're describing the roof in this home, and we have illustrations, and then we actually have images of the roof itself. And it tells you what kinds of shingles are on that roof and what the life expectancy is for them. The third section, if there were something, the second section is if there were something needing attention now, though that section is called observations and recommendations. And so within each system or component, if there were issues that needed to be addressed on this roof, we would see them in observations. So if shingles are lifting up or they're loose or there's no flashing, and all of those types of things would be an observation and recommendation. And that's what gets the most attention during the real estate transaction, because that's where we get the things that we want to either ask the seller or have the buyer decide, do you want to own this? And then the third section, which we have an example of right here, is the inspection methods and limitations. And that's exactly what it sounds like. How did we gather this information? So on the roof section, you can see we did it with a drone. If there were limitations, so if it were raining or we couldn't see something or the gas wasn't on or whatever it is within each section, if there are limitations, it's in that section of the report as well. I want to argue that the limitations is probably the most underutilized section of inspection reports, that when people call and their house doesn't match their inspection report, it's often because they made an assumption based on something that we had a limitation about, and that assumption proved wrong for them. So with that, we are going to get into this actual report itself. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about what the client services does in terms of scheduling new construction inspections. As soon as you know that that your client needs an inspection on a newer construction home, if they've done a pre-drywall, you can schedule the final inspection. Some people do it what we call pre-close. So when the builder is finished with everything, usually about a week or so ahead of closing, we'll come in and do a final performance-based inspection, and that's what we're going to talk about today. And we know that those often get scheduled well ahead of when the house is actually finished. And so that presents some need for flexibility on our part, and we're able to accommodate that because builders often have, their eyes are bigger than their calendars in terms of they think things are going to get done faster than they do. And so we'll kind of chase that around with you. So as soon as you have an idea of a date, we can get you on the schedule and we can start following it up. It's important to get on the schedule as soon as possible because most builders will require us to get approval from them for us to inspect the house for your buyer who's paying. And builders are very persnickety. They require all kinds of insurances. There are all kinds of hoops we have to jump through. We have to send them our credentials, the actual inspector's credentials, the company's credentials. We have to send them our car insurance. It's ridiculous. But they want to make sure that they don't have to deal with rogue inspectors inspecting their properties. And the builder does not care if your client gets an inspection. So I have been on the phone with builders begging them to rush approvals for clients that didn't think about this until too late, and really trying to work within the builder's timeframes. And if the builder says no, the builder says no, and there's nothing anybody can do about it. So the sooner you get on the schedule, the sooner we can start the sending of credentials and getting that going. Some buyers opt to do an inspection instead of pre-close. They opt to do that inspection right around the 11-month warranty mark. Well, it's usually a 12-month warranty you get with the builder. And so some of them like to do the inspection around the 11th. That way they've had a chance to live in the house, but they still have a month of warranty where they can submit these repairs to the builder. And it's really, we notice that happens more in our South Carolina market than our Atlanta market, but it's really up to the individual buyer. And either way, we're happy to help. So Rael, let's hear from you about the approach of an inspector when you are going to new construction versus a home that's been lived in before. What stands out in your mind, and how do you look at it? I know it's a lot the same, but what are the ways you look at it maybe a little bit differently?
Yeah, well, everything, if it's pre-drywall, then there's a lot different than if it's just before closing. Just before closing, we're going to operate all the machinery. We're going to test everything that's live and working. Whereas pre-drywall is, in most cases, the electricity may not be connected. There might not be water to the unit, etc. So it's not going to be a performance-based inspection. It's going to be basically, it's either yes, it's right, or no, it's wrong. Certainly the structural part is visible now because the drywall has not been installed. So that's a little looking at it a lot differently than just doing a resale inspection or a pre-closing inspection. So it's basically it's right or it's wrong in the structural stage.
And we actually did a whole webinar on PreDrywall. And so if you all have questions about that, you can ask us when we send you the link to this video. You can ask to get the video of the PreDrywall. Rael, for a pre-close new construction, do you just go in thinking everything's going to be great because it's brand new, this will be easy breezy, or what types of things go through your head as an inspector?
Well, the fact is that most actual general contractors don't present themselves on the work site. The work's all being done by subcontractors, and depending on the subcontractors and who they're employing, it could be a bunch of guys that picked up at the Home Fix-It store this morning to help out because there's a shortage of help. So we're kind of approaching this, kind of looking at it and saying, well, okay, let's just be sure that everything is working correctly. And there are several examples that we could give. Perhaps this is not the time until later in this presentation, but we can get into that. But again, if it's just before closing, we do want to make sure that everything is working. And one of the things that actually will come up shortly that we'll see in just a little while is the fact of the air conditioning. Do we want to cover that now, or should I?
We'll get there and cover it then. So essentially, the house hasn't had a chance for somebody to live in it and make sure all these things work. So even if the builder has a warranty, once you close, you now go in, you have to wait in line past all the people that they're wanting to close. And so it's a big hassle to live in a house with AC that may not be functioning as well as it could, or there could be structural issues that won't show up for years. Or we had one where the electrical for the primary bathroom wasn't connected to the panel. And so imagine living in, move in and you have no electricity in your primary bathroom until the builder decides to go fix it. So the hassle factor, not just who's paying for it, are reasons that you want an inspector to go in there and essentially run everything and make sure it's up to snuff before you get to closing. All right, we're going to start where the report starts, and that is the roof. But why don't you tell us, when you get to a house, where do you start when you get out of the car in terms of looking? How does an inspection go in a house?
Okay, so we drive up and we're having a look at my first look would be the topography. How does the land lot? Is the slope of the yard towards the house or away from the house? What does the drainage look like? So that's the first thing that we want to see. Simply, one of the bigger factors in home ownership is if we're with a crawl space, or if we're in a basement and we have the slope towards the home, then perhaps we may have to consider issues of water intrusion around the foundation. And with a slab, certainly we're in there. If there's a heavy rain, that might be an issue as well. So the topography is important. And then we want to look at, I usually just walk around the exterior of the home in a clockwise manner. And there's so much information on the outside. All the connections for electrical, HVAC, etc., plumbing, hose bibs, that's all out there, the siding, the soffits, and the roof, of course, the gutters. So all of those items are out there. You walk around and make notes and put information into our laptop or into our phone, and then do an anti-clockwise as well. So now we've looked at it twice, gotten a general idea of what it looks like on the outside before we go to the interior.
Okay, and then you go to the interior and you go top to bottom?
Yeah, first thing I would do is get into the kitchen and start that dishwasher running, simply because it's going to take an hour or so to go through the complete cycle. And at that point, head on up to the top. So I wouldn't walk the roof right away, even though that was one of the first things that we saw. Certainly would have been able to identify the type of material that the roofing was. But at that point, inside, up into the attic, and then inspecting the attic. And the home is on a slab. Likelihood is that the HVAC unit, the heating unit, would be in an attic. Sometimes, though, they're in the garage or down below. So, we'd find those. In the attic, we'd see the structure in the attic, the insulation, the penetrations to the roof, and even if there were any roof leaks, we'd see stains that might have showed up onto our sheathing on the inside of the attic. So those are the things that we'd be looking for up in the attic. And then we'd come down to the top floor, and on the top floor of the bedrooms and bathrooms, go through that process: electrical, plumbing, checking out flushing toilets, running hot and cold water, etc. And then the whole idea is really working from top down. Is if there is an issue with plumbing, hopefully that there would have showed up a stain or could hear some water running by the time we got to the level below.
Okay. So the report, though, starts with the roof. And so that's where we are going to start by watching what happens on site. So let me pause and share with you the video of how we drone the roof. Possibly. There we go.
Roof is only as good as the installation. So if the right crew did it, you have no problems. The roof materials are fine. They were installed as per manufacturer's recommendations, and you're fine for 20, 25 years on an architectural roof like this one. But if the crew didn't install it as per manufacturer's recommendations, they didn't flash it correctly, you could have problems prematurely.
Okay, so sometimes we see issues with flashing and installation. Absolutely. And that's what you're looking at. All right, very good. Let's watch your drone fly. It's taking a picture of me while I'm taking a picture of it.
Okay, you can see how fun I think inspections are. On our website, also for those watching, Jim put together a whole 6-minute video about what it looks like to drone the roof and how close we're able to get to those penetrations. And it's a really fascinating video. So we walk the roof where we can get home. The most important thing for my inspectors is that they get home for dinner so that they can, I need them tomorrow. So if they can walk the roof, they do walk the roof. And if not, we have drones. We guarantee all of our clients an image from above the roof. So this roof didn't have any issues that we saw in it. Rael, can you think back to some of your new construction roofs and talk about some of the things that might go wrong with a brand new roof?
Yeah, absolutely. There are several items. Number one, today the installation of the roof is done with a power nailer or staple machine, whereas in the old days it used to be simply a nail and a hammer that would install the shingle itself. So you want to see that it has the correct overlap on each of the shingles, because on the edge of the shingles there's a very sticky part that actually is there, and when the heat gets to the shingle, it seals it down, so it becomes a completely sealed unit. So that's the one thing as far as the installation goes. The second part of it is, as you mentioned in the video, that it had to be installed correctly, and the way it was done with flashing, make sure that the flashing was actually there. So that's an important factor. And also with new construction these days, some of the contractors are using foam insulation. And if that's done from the interior of the attic space. If it's done correctly, it's fine. If it's not, then there's an issue with the manufacturer covering his warranty on the shingle. And what I'm referring to there is that if the insulation on the inside, the foam on the inside of the attic, is applied directly to the sheathing, then there's no airspace between the insulation and the actual shingle. What actually happens then is the heat fries the shingles themselves, and the heat doesn't actually penetrate into the attic space. So the result there is that the shingle would wear out a lot quicker. The way to install that insulation, of course, is to have what we call a baffle on the inside of the sheathing in the attic to allow air to travel between the insulation and the exterior.
Okay, thank you. All right, let's move to the rest of the exterior. You probably heard Rael say that he walks it clockwise and anti or counterclockwise. I am going to show you, we have a couple of images from the exterior of this house. And so let's start by sharing some of those.
The siding here on this porch, there's a gap, about an eighth, quarter of an inch underneath where the siding isn't tight against the other siding below it. So that should be caulked as a maintenance item to prevent any kind of insects from getting up inside the siding.
All right, and that's the exterior section of the report.
That is.
Okay, so in the exterior section of the report, you can see the images from where Jim found issues related to caulking at the seams. And again, the builder believes they are done with the house by the time that we are getting there for this inspection. And so those are some areas that still need attention. What happens if you don't caulk them, Rael?
Well, certainly, like he was mentioning, bugs and things get in there. It's an interesting thing. If we look up the fiber cement siding, which is the siding that's on this particular home, nowadays that they use a product called a house wrap. I'm sure new folks have seen new constructions, like a big plastic exterior shell that's put onto the home. Didn't used to be like that. They used to have gypsum board or plyboard that would go into the exterior of the house, but the house would still be sort of somewhat breezy. The air could travel through. Now they're encapsulating the whole exterior of the house in this big plastic cocoon, basically, which certainly helps us with the loss of heat and cooling there. And so where it was originally required to have siding caulked in each area, it's not as serious a deal now because of that plastic barrier that's underneath there. However, when you're dealing with the trim, that's a separate issue, and wherever those gaps are, the moisture can get in there. What happens is when you get moisture, you get warm space, then you have potential for mold growth. So that's why this is an important factor. Unfortunately, when you're dealing with the home that's really right just before closing and it's been painted and some of these issues show up, then there's likely not only the caulking that needs to be done, but you got the issue of some paint work that needs to be done as well. So that might become a bit of a contention issue, but it should be addressed.
Okay. We also found an electrical box that was missing, I guess, the interior components. Let me share the video of that.
So on the outside of the house, we have what looks like an exterior outlet. When we open up the cover, there's no outlet inside. The only thing that's inside is some insulation. So the problem with that is that the box is not sealed to the exterior. And what we're going to have is we're going to have hot, humid air come into that box and meet up with the cool wall that is inside the house, and we're going to have condensation. It's going to condense. It's going to cause mold and issues down the road. So we're definitely going to want the builder to come out and address this. Seal the outside of that box up. Make sure that no air can come in, and eliminate any chance of issue with mold in the future.
All right, you can see the inspector had a little bit of help from a puppy there too. So that was another thing found on the exterior. And now I want to share just a little bit of the report, just to give another example of how the description section is helpful later. So we are still in the exterior section, and if you go to the description, you can just see generally there are no gutters on this house right now. We've got the lot slope and other parts of the home, but this is in Charleston, South Carolina, and storm panels are common for the windows there because they get weather that we don't see in our Georgia market. And so when the inspector found the storm panels for this house, he just took a picture of where they were in the garage. And so that's another example of how helpful it is for us to have that description section. In the limitations on this section, you can see that there are cars in the garage. And so that limits how much we're able to see in the garage. And so anytime that there is a limitation, you may say, well, that's just fine. I'm not worried about what's underneath those cars. And you're probably right. It's just an important risk factor to take into account. So sometimes limitations are the crawl space is too small to access. You're taking a much bigger risk than just some cars in the garage, but every buyer needs to look at those on their own. Let's go to the structure. And in this report, there isn't much detail or there isn't much to be concerned about, I guess, on the structure. We are we've got a slab structure. So what does that mean, Rael?
Well, there's no basement, there's no crawl space here. It's just a solid concrete slab that's there, and they build onto the top of that.
And we're not really able to see much of it at the inspection level.
Right.
Okay. And one other thing, though, that I think people forget, this is again in the description section, is the roof and ceiling framing. We've got trusses, and we actually have a picture, a video of the trusses being installed next door, which I thought might be fun for us to see. So let me share that video. We felt like we got lucky. Now I will tell you, we at first were a little bit worried that the house was going to get unlucky because the crane wasn't quite
Stable.
stable. It looked like the driver might have some issues, but here we go. This is what it looks like to put the trusses in, which I think is really fun. So Rael, tell us about that method of construction. Where
Yes.
does
So
this come from?
this is it. I mean, what we're dealing with now is we're dealing with prefabricated truss work. We find a lot of that in new construction now, and it's really a boon to the construction industry. They're basically, the architect has drawn up and the engineers have checked it out, and now you're having the whole roof structure is actually being built in a factory off-site. And then they're actually bringing all of these structures to the home. And of course, we saw that the crane in this case. This is totally different from what was done in the early years of what we call stick framing, which is individual pieces of lumber for the rafters, for the ceiling joists, etc. So in the back, I'm talking older days. I'm talking from personal older age experience. But the rooms were sort of 14 feet would kind of be stretching it for a larger room without any posts to hold up any obstructions. And now with the advent of engineered trusses and structures, the rooms are much, much bigger. And it's sort of weird because folks wanted very open homes, which was great for entertaining and for people to get together. And it was all very, kitchens were open into eating areas and family rooms, etc. And then COVID hit. And so now we had to have a smaller space that was sort of subdivided so we could each have our own office and not be hacking and coughing over other people in the house. So it's sort of doing a cycle around and around, but certainly the whole idea of having those prefabricated trusses makes the actual construction process a lot quicker than having to be individually built stick by stick.
And if there are any alterations made to that truss, tell us how that shows up in an inspection report.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, sometimes modifications happen on site. So if something didn't quite, you know, perhaps work out with the way the house was framed, they might need to do something in order to make those trusses fit correctly. Well, you can't just cut pieces of the truss out. The whole structure itself is built to meet the standards set by the engineer. So it's not like you know, even something that could happen on site where somebody dropped a heavy load onto one of the trusses and maybe snapped one of those trusses. You can't just sort of scab it together and put it into place. It actually has to be looked at again by a structural engineer, and for him to give the okay on it before it moves forward. And it's not uncommon to find those things in the attic, and that's why we're in there looking at those individual structure, you know, to make sure that everything is actually in good shape and not damaged in any way.
All right, so trusses is not acceptable.
Correct.
All right, let's move on to the electricity. There are essentially 3 places where we might gather information about electricity. The first is on the outside when we are looking at the service. The second is we will actually take the cover off of the panel. And finally, we're checking it at each individual outlet. And so let's watch, we've got video of all 3 of those. So let's watch these.
This is going to be the ground. Most likely goes into the ground here with a copper grounding rod. I can't see it, so I'm actually going to call out that it's not visible, but most likely in this case, it's going to be a copper wire and a copper grounding rod.
Okay, and sometimes you can see them, especially on new construction, not new construction, old construction.
Sometimes we can actually see the wire. It's not encased in this conduit like this one is. Older houses usually don't have the conduit, and you can actually see the grounding rod with a clamp, and you can see how it's grounded. In this case, I can't see it, but it is grounded. This is going to be the ground. Mostly.
All right, so that is our the service. Tell us what you're looking at when you look at that service box. That is it called the distribution panel?
No, that's a disconnect pack. Right next to the meter would be the main
disconnect panel.
So yeah, the main disconnect may be at that location. There are several different locations for a main disconnect. One of them is outside at the meter, so that you have the round meter, and right next to it there's a little kind of panel that you can lift up, and there's a main breaker there, and that shuts off the electrical power to the whole house. The other location would be in the electrical distribution panel itself. So that's the big panel that we look at with all the breakers in it. It has one big switch at the top. In this particular case, when Jim was pointing out that the ground wire ran from that meter down into the ground in the conduit, so again, he couldn't see it, so it would be marked as somewhat as a limitation. But other locations would be noted as well. A lot of the new construction, when it's being done, is they actually install a big piece of rebar, which is metal, in the foundation itself. And there's a clamp that goes to that. We used to find them in the garage or carport area, and it's usually covered with a double blank plate. Just looks like a regular switch plate, but double the size. And we would always take off that little cover and see where the actual connection was. It's called a UFER, a UFER connection, and there'd be the clamp from the electrical system to that rebar that's there, which was also, suffice. In older homes, when we had galvanized steel water supply or copper water supply, the grounding could be done to that as well with a clamp. But over the years, as galvanized steel has now reached the end of its life expectancy and is being replaced by plastic water supplies, that we need to still make sure that there is a grounding there. So we install a grounding rod to the exterior somewhere.
And that brings up one thing we found at this house, and it's really interesting because the way that we report is which system or component is affected, not where we found it. So as Jim was inspecting the water heater, he found that there was an issue with where the water heater was grounded. And so let's watch that, and then we'll get Rael to comment and help us see it a little bit better. Let's see.
Mounted tankless water heater. It's not instant hot water, but it's continuous hot water. So the things we're looking for here is we're looking to make sure that we have a nice whip on a nice conduit, and actually a shut off here for the electric, the gas line here. We have a nice drip leg, which is important. One thing I did notice on this, that this is the ground that goes to this metal gas pipe. Now, this is proper except for the fact that this was added after this pipe was painted. So this is not making a good contact now. So we're going to call that as a deficiency.
Oh, because the pipe has.
So Rael, explain that a little bit more for us.
Yeah, so what we want when we have a grounding is we want a metal to metal contact. So we're going to have that wire needs to be to basically raw metal. Not with the paint in between, because that would be sort of having a barrier between the two connectors. We want that to actually be a solid connection, metal to metal, so that the actual power is properly grounded there. If you have that painting there, it wouldn't be a proper ground. It's interesting to me the way the builders are actually doing that to a gas line. If we get an electrical strike and we've got power, shooting through there, I don't know that I'd want it to a gas line, but it is acceptable. So there it is.
Interesting. So, but the point of grounding is to get the electricity to the ground where it can't hurt anybody.
Absolutely,
right?
Correct.
So we want the connections to be good as it gets there. Yeah. Okay. Let's look at inside what we're finding when we get to now I think we're at the distribution panel. So let's see what we're seeing there. And this time we have Steve Fish.
I'm going to test the electrical, or look at the electrical. So I pulled the panel off. Things I'm looking at, make sure the breakers are in there pretty good. I want to make sure all the wires are the correct gauges per the amperage of the breakers.
How do you know?
I just know. Like I know a 15 should be a 14 gauge. I know that a 20 amp should be a 12 gauge, and so on and so forth in increments. I know that the main service coming in should be 4-aught copper, or excuse me, 4-aught aluminum or 2-aught copper. We just know.
You're like, I'm smart. That's how I know.
I know stuff. Things I look for, if this is the main disconnect or not. There is actually an additional disconnect that's required outside. That is the actual main disconnect, but there is also a secondary one here in the distribution panel. One of the things I look for, anytime you see this inside a house, it should be bonded. You'll see a green screw right here. That's obviously missing because there's a disconnect outside.
Okay.
So that screw should be at your first disconnect. So things like that I look for. This is obviously a newer house, so it's a 4-wire system. You got the neutral, the 2 hots, and then your ground's coming over here.
What are some of the things that sometimes go wrong besides the wires are the wrong size? What is it, double negatives or double negatives or double tapped or something?
Double tap. So double tap is anytime you see any of these wires coming in here and you see 2 wires coming off of one lug, that's a double tap.
Okay.
Also with neutrals, sometimes you'll see neutrals bundled together. They shouldn't be. Each one should have its own lug.
Okay.
Obviously, in the older systems, it was more common to see that a lot. Not always the end of the world as far as electric goes. We want to look and make sure breakers are resetting if they're tripped. We want to make sure there's no scorching on the wires.
Okay. What about AFCIs? Do you see those here?
I do. So as code progresses throughout time, so back to 2009, 2012, they started requiring AFCs in the bedrooms. Current code now requires AFCs in any living space at all. That's why you see all these tests right here.
Okay. We just know.
All right, Rael, talk to us about the AFCs, what they are and why we want them.
Okay, so I know everybody, pulls their bed away from the wall at least once every 2 weeks to get the lint and then whatever else is sitting back there, right? But what is an AFC? It's actually an arc fault circuit interrupter. So if you've ever tried to plug in an appliance to the wall and you see a little spark sometimes shoots out, that's called arcing. And so folks are concerned that when arcing happens, that it could cause a fire if there was combustible material nearby. So we have them in the bedrooms for that particular reason, is you haven't pulled the bed away and vacuumed behind there because there might be some lint and stuff back there. And if an arcing actually did happen, that would be a cause for perhaps a fire to start. So that's when it brought it on in. It's the same sort of idea as a GFCI, ground fault circuit interrupter, which has been around for a long time now for kitchens and bathrooms near water, as well as on the exterior. So as Steve was pointing out, as we progress along the way, we can come up with new safety devices all the way along the line to make sure that the folks are protected in the home. When he was talking about, and you asked the question about the double taps and how do you know about the wire? The wires are all different sizes. So he's talking about a 12 gauge wire that, it's a small wire and that's going to go into a 15 amp breaker. And then as you go to the larger size wires, so for instance, perhaps just a regular electrical outlet would be a 15 amp breaker, but you might have a dishwasher or another appliance that would require 20 amps for its operation. If you had a 15 amp wire connected to a 20 amp breaker, what actually happens when electricity is pulled during use, it heats up the wire. And as the wire gets more and more use, and so more and more electricity is being pulled through, the wire gets very, very hot. Well, the breaker is meant to trip when the wire got too hot. However, if you had a small wire going into a larger breaker, the breaker wouldn't trip. And you would have a flame up and a fire before the breaker would actually trip. So when he was talking about having melted wiring or scorched wiring in the panel, that was something that needed to be addressed by a qualified electrician for repair, because obviously something's going on there that it should not.
Very good. Let's go to the outlets and take a look at how we check the outlets for power. So give me just a second.
So we test GFCIs. It's a ground fault circuit interrupter. Basically, anytime you have any small appliance, in the case we're in the laundry room, so you're ironing your clothes, freak accident, the washing machine explodes, there's water everywhere, it creates an arc. What should happen is that plug should shut off.
Okay.
And it can, in some cases it's at the plug, in some cases it's at the panel. To test that, we just take the tester
Okay.
and shut it off.
And you know it shut off because you heard it trip.
Correct.
All right.
So we test GFCIs.
Oops, apparently I run it on a loop. So Rael, talk to us about what you see if the lights don't do what they're supposed to do. Tell us how that works a little bit, and then talk to us about the difference between representative numbers of those things versus exhaustive numbers.
Well, yeah, we do our inspections to ASHI standards, American Society of Home Inspectors. And when they talk about doing an ASHI inspection, they do a representative number of the components. So what does that actually mean? That means that if there are 6 electrical outlets in the room and we test about 4 of them, we've basically met the ASHI standards. We at HomePro tend to do them all because you know how that works is that folks come over and the one outlet that wasn't tested was the one that's not working, and then there's that phone call. So who gets the first phone call, of course, is the agent, and then the agent gives us a call, and then we're going to have to sort that out. So wherever we can, we're going to test them all, and if we can't test them all, then there's going to be a remark in the limitation section of why we couldn't test that particular outlet. So yeah, we want to do them all if we can. We have the test. You saw that Steve was using. It's a 3-prong tester, and it has a little button on it that creates a shortage or a differential in the current that's traveling through the particular outlet. And we look for the 3 lights that will come up that will tell us that it is correct, that it is grounded, and then we can move on to the next one. If there's something that's incorrect, it'll show up on that little tester as well. Like reverse polarity, where a positive and a neutral have been switched in error, and that's very easy to fix. You just change them around. So yeah, all those little things come up, you know, with those testers that we use. And what was the first part of that, Melanie?
No, that was it. That was exactly it.
Okay.
So, all right, let's move on to the heating and cooling sections. So for heating, we're typically finding the furnace, and then we are visually inspecting it, and then we're running it, and we are seeing how it performs. So Rael, talk to us about in this, let me go to this report and we will look at the furnace, and you can tell us a little bit about what you're looking for when you inspect a furnace. So this one says it's a mid-efficiency gas. Tell us more.
Yeah, so everything that we need to know about this furnace is on a data plate that's there. And so we will actually see that, there we go, we see the data plate, and you know, we see there it's December 2020 is when this particular unit was manufactured. The house that we inspected was new, so it was within a year. And then it tells you also the capacity. So we're looking at 55,000 or 60,000 BTU. So that's all going to be on the data plate itself. Can you just back up a hair to the previous? So there we go, 65,000 BTU, and on up a little bit more. So when we're looking at the actual furnace itself, we see that yellow gas line that's coming in there, and we have it connected to the hard pipe that's going to go into the furnace itself. That's our gas supply. And there's going to be a shutoff that we're looking at. That's a little red right above the cabinet. There's our shutoff valve. And then on the left side, we're looking at that little piece that extends on down on that gray gas line is called a drip leg. And the bottom of that drip leg, they have a little closure nut that's on the bottom to catch any impurities that might have traveled through the gas line into that. You don't want that going into the working area of the furnace itself. So we see here that we've got those little black knobs on the front. Those are the knobs that are undone in order to actually access the inside of that furnace. And we don't we don't actually take the furnace apart when we're looking at it to inspect it, but we will run the unit from the thermostat, and then having that cover off the front of that furnace, we'll be able to actually see the flame. And what we're looking for in that flame is a nice blue flame instead of a lot of orange, orange would tell us that there's some kind of rust taking place in the furnace itself. So that would be unusual. We also want to look at the flame to make sure that it's not wavering a lot, which would give us an indication that there was some air traveling through that area, which it should not. So you see right here where we actually get the supply temperature is coming out at 130 degrees, which is awesome. That's where you'd like to be for a furnace. What was that?
I said I'm very jealous. I don't have a gas furnace.
Okay. Yeah. So on a gas furnace like this, we're getting 130 degrees, and we're actually going to go to each of the supply ducts on the interior of each room and see what we're getting out of each one. And so if there was a big differential between any of the ducts at all on the supply side, not return, but on the supply side, then there might be an issue there. Perhaps there was a hole or a disconnected duct somewhere, and therefore you weren't getting the temperature that we needed. Also, depending on how far away you were from the actual furnace itself, might perhaps be a 5 to 10 degree differential, was not that big of a deal. But this is great. This is new. This is working just the way it should. And then we dealt with the little 14 by 25 filter, which was shown there. And those filters are a regular maintenance item, so they should be changed every 90 days. So we look at it at every 3 months, 4 times a year. That's the way to do it. It's also interesting, though, and we don't, we have not got the capability of looking inside of the actual ductwork. But we look into the supply ducts themselves where the registers are. An issue that sometimes comes up on new construction is when the sanding is done on the drywall, some of that sanding dust has gotten into the ductwork. So certainly changing out those filters regularly right in the beginning when we move into the house is a good thing to do so that it doesn't settle in those ducts and become an issue ongoing.
All right, I'm going to move to the fireplace. So if there's a fireplace, that's also covered in the heating section. And this is one of the areas that we probably get the most questions about how we inspect the fireplace. So let me have Steve share with you his inspection of this fireplace. Here we go. And I was able to play it earlier today, and now it is not letting me. I'm going to try one more time. It says it does not like the format. Let's see. Nope, it's not going to. So, Rael, if this one it happens to be gas logs, do we start fires? When do we start fires? What do we do when we're checking the fireplace?
Yeah, we'll try to, we won't, dismantle the fireplace, but there's usually going to be a little button that we can click, a starter button, if the gas is on. So the first thing that we look at is the gas line coming in to the actual unit, and is the switch in an on position. So if the switch is in on position and allowing the gas to flow in, we could go ahead and try to fire up the fireplace, and then we're able to get it going, and it's fine. If it's not, then we would report it as being inoperative, and to have somebody come in and see to it that it is actually able to be operated.
All right, so I'm going to share the report screen again. So again, this description section is really helpful because whenever your client is like, particularly in new construction where there aren't necessarily a lot of things going on with the house that are going to show up in the report as observations and recommendations, clients are like, well, did they even look at the fireplace? And we can see in the description section, we identify that there is a fireplace and what type of heat source, and he actually took a picture of those gas logs here as well. So that's how you know that the inspector inspected it, because if it were wood burning, it wouldn't say gas log in the fireplace. And if there were no fireplace, what would it say?
There's no fireplace.
None, right? Or it wouldn't be in there. So,
and that's one of those enclosed units. That's not an open fireplace that could have been converted from wood burning to gas log, because it's new construction. So a lot of the stuff is already encapsulated and closed in right there. All
right. So the air conditioner also has two different places that we're inspecting it. One when we're looking outside. And secondly, when we actually run it. I'm going to see if I can share the videos from Steve and Jim about that part of the inspection, and then we'll have you talk about what happened with the AC here. It is suddenly, it's not liking any
It
of
was working fine earlier because I was watching it.
mine earlier today. One more try on the interior. Here we go.
So what are you doing, Steve?
I'm taking a temperature differential for the AC.
What does that mean?
So we test the AC, we turn the AC on, we let it run for a good 10-15 minutes. I take a temperature reading between the air that's coming out of the registers versus what's going back into the air return.
Okay, so that's the supply,
Right, and then that's your return.
and that's the return, and the difference is our story problem. What should it be?
So I want to see between a 14 and 22 degree difference between the two. That's a quick indicator to me that everything is working properly. We don't carry the big HVAC gauges and test for pressure and things like that. So
Okay, so that tells you, and I know ASHI says we just do a representative number. What does HomePro do?
I test all the registers,
Everyone.
everyone.
Love it. All right, what's this one?
62.
Was that 62 too?
64. 70.
All right, so Rael, this is when he realizes that, I will tell you, because I was there, you can hear me asking the dumb questions, that it felt perfectly cool in this house. Steve and I were talking about it, and I was like, what's the temperature differential? And that's when he started going to more before he would answer me, because it was not, it was below 14-degree temperature difference, meaning the air coming out was
Outside of the parameters of the, 14 to 22 degrees.
yeah. So tell me, it was a brand new air conditioning system. How could that happen?
Okay, well, when the manufacturer sends the outside unit to the home to be installed, it doesn't arrive fully, energized with refrigerant. It just has a minimal amount to actually have the motor work if you cut it on. So it's just like your car. When your car gets brought from the factory to the dealership, it doesn't have a full tank of gas. It just has a little bit in it. And then they can fill it up when they get to the dealership. The same thing happens here in construction. What actually should happen is that the HVAC contractor, prior to signing off on the whole unit being completely done, should have topped up that refrigerant all the way up, and then it would have been working correctly. And that's a fairly common thing that we do find in new construction, is when there's not enough temperature differential, even though the house feels like it's cool, that is not the way it is. And the way he did it was the right way, of course, by checking all of the supply and all the returns, and realizing there that there was not that differential that we should have had.
Okay, and I know we happen to know that that they were able to get this fixed, and now it works. Now it works great. All right, we're going to finish up by talking about the plumbing. And again, we have exterior where we're looking at the plumbing. One of the things that we do on the exterior is check the water pressure. And so let's see if we can watch it happening. Here we go.
We're going to want to check, make sure they're secure, for one thing. And then secondly, we're going to check the pressure of the water inside the house. So we're going to put our pressure gauge on there, and we're going to put it on like such, and we'll give a reading. So on this one, we're actually getting about 75 pounds of pressure, which is phenomenal, which is great. So typically we see between 40 and 80. We don't want to see less than 40, and we don't want to see more than 80. So 40 to 80 is the sweet spot, and we're well within that at 75 pounds.
All right, so that was, we checked the hose bibs and the water pressure on the outside. Let's watch us inspect a bathroom. One of the things when I first started doing ride-alongs with our inspectors that really surprised me was how much water we run in the house. And so here we go. We'll watch Steve inspect a bathroom.
All right, let's talk about inspecting a bathroom. I hear the fan running. Why do you run the fan?
So we run the fan. I leave it running throughout the whole inspection, so that when I go up in the attic, I can verify that it's terminating outside.
Okay.
Whether we're in the kitchen, the bathroom, no matter where we're at, if there's a water source, we run it. We run as much as possible so that we can get as much water through the waste system to check for leaks. And we're just checking to make sure there's no leaks underneath from the piping.
You're actually feeling it with your hand.
Correct. Test to make sure that there's proper pressure or functional pressure. We will also put a pressure gauge on like an outside spigot to get an actual number for that.
Okay.
And we test to make sure we got hot water.
Hot on cold on left, cold on right.
Correct.
All right. Do you fill up the bathtub?
We do not.
Later you'll hear me say, what if there's jets? Then he corrects himself and says, if there's jets, we fill it up and run the jets. Rael, does anything ever go wrong with plumbing in new construction?
All kinds of stuff goes wrong with plumbing in new construction. Prior to the product that they're using mostly now, which is called PEX, P-E-X, we had some water supply that was polybutylene that didn't turn out really well. Became a lawsuit and defective product, and then they went over to CPVC. And basically what happened is, again, it comes down to the subcontractor installation where water lines can get crossed over hot to cold. We did an inspection one time where there was hot water that showed up in the toilet, so that was an issue. And, you know, a lot of times it can be crossed over. Even whenever you have a faucet, hot water should be on the left and cold water on the right. And sometimes those get crossed over. And we're just concerned about, you know, young people or even older people just getting themselves, burned because they turned on the wrong faucet, or the faucet was hooked up incorrectly. So all these kind of things, you know, do come up all the way along. Yep.
All right, so we are done with our presentation. We are going to leave it open for questions. One of the questions is, do we inspect new construction to code? Rael, will you address that?
Yeah, so when we started out, we talked about new construction. It's either correct or it's not correct. It's yes or no, black and white. What we deal with as far as code is, when we deal with new construction, most of the time is actually taken up if there were issues that needed to be addressed. We would have to go to the code issue, but we don't inspect the code. We inspect to ASHI standards. But in order to get the builder to do what he should be doing, we may have to refer to the code in order to get it done. So the codes that's actually used is the International Residential Code, the IRC or the ICC, because basically, you know, in any area, however many jurisdictions we have, however many little cities or municipalities, each one of them adopts the code the way they see it. So there's no standard of inspection there. So that's why ASHI is the method of inspection that we do. And that's why only in the case of if we have to specifically say, hey, you know, this is wrong, or this wasn't done correctly, and then we'd give them and cite them the actual code to back up our inspection finding.
All right, someone wants to know about us mentioning that South Carolina new construction inspections are frequently done at the 11-month post-closing mark, but Georgia not so much. Why is that? I don't know, other than I think it's just the habits of each market. A lot of times, especially if you haven't done a pre-drywall in Georgia, they really like to do an inspection before that warranty mark. But we do get calls in Georgia to do the 11-month inspection. Sometimes people believe one of the myths that Rael talked about in another webinar, the myths people believe about new construction, which is that everything's perfect because it's new. And so often in Georgia, if they're not doing an inspection until that 11-month warranty, it's because they just thought they didn't need one and they come back around later. And I would say also in Georgia, the ones we see not doing that new construction inspection pre-close are people who aren't working with real estate agents. So the builder's agent acts as both the buyer and the seller's agent for them. And sometimes those people are not choosing to get an inspection before close and are choosing to get it at the warranty mark. So we will do the same inspection either way. It's just if you do it pre-close, if there are issues that affect the convenient living in the house, right? Like if your electricity isn't connected or things like that, you get to resolve those ahead of time. One other issue that comes up often in new construction inspections is, that last minute finishing the house up right before closing. Sometimes the appliances aren't installed at the time that we're doing the inspection. We will come back out when they are installed if you'll call us, and we will inspect those at no extra charge. That's called a courtesy visit. All right, last question, Rael. The most common question I hear us getting at the inspection is, should I buy this house? How do you answer the question of, should we buy this house?
I already have one. Would I buy this house? It's with us, it's really just a matter of providing as much information as we can about the product that these folks are considering to buy. And it's not up to us to pass or fail that house from our point of view. We're not there to put that stumbling block in front of anybody. What we want to do is just provide all the information that we can, and then it's up to the buyer to make a final decision. Well, can they live with what we found, or if the builder or the seller decides to repair what's in the report or not. In this market that we've seen over the last couple of years, it's kind of been insane. If you're asking for a little bit of insulation, the deal falls apart and they move on to something else. But in actual fact, on new construction, this is, again, just a negotiating process. And the more information folks can have about the condition of their home, the better off they are. But it's not our job and not our purview to say, hey, this is just, forget about it. That's not for us to determine.
Fair enough. Question about venting in the attics. If your attic is not vented because it is sealed with spray foam insulation, would you still want to install baffles? And how would that ventilate and cool the shingles without heating the sealed space?
Yeah, if that installation was done with foam insulation, if it's going to be up between the rafters on the roof, it needed to have the baffles there. Basically, what happens is from the soffit, from the overhang to the peak of the roof where there should be a ridge vent, that area would have need to have baffles in it to allow that air to travel through. If it was not done like that, and I don't know, unless there was a gap somewhere where you could actually see that the baffles were not there, there would be very little way of knowing if it was actually installed with baffles in place. Do bear in mind, though, that the county or the city inspectors are not liable for any issues that might show up later. I was looking through the South Carolina stuff online, and I see that they're not liable there as well as in Georgia. There's no way that you can go back and have a guarantee that the actual inspection was great or inspected was done correctly. It's just a matter of it's out there. You also just have to bear in mind that when you do a private inspection at HomePro, we're going to do everything that we can, and we'll stand behind our inspection. Mel can tell you about the guarantee that we have.
Yeah, we guarantee the work for 100 days. So, all right, everybody, thank you so much for joining us. I'm so glad that you want to learn more about the inspection part of the real estate transaction. We are known as sometimes when you're grabbing a beer as the deal killers, which isn't how we want to be known. We just want to help buyers get information so they can be confident in themselves to own the house rather than confident in the state of the house. So we want to help buyers have that, develop that their own confidence as homeowners, because they will have a much better experience in that house and they'll become happier sellers. And every time they're happier and they talk about their house, they mention you, their realtor, with it. So take care, look for our luxury series on the website. That's what we're talking about in June. We'll talk about pool inspections, when we inspect luxury homes, how that differs from a regular home. And we've got a couple of interviews with realtors for best practices. Good to see you, Rael, and go make some great real estate happen and kick off the summer well. See you, everybody.